everybody. I am the Quad Professor. Today we're going into our second installment on building your own system, and in this installment we're going to be looking at choosing a box that best suits your need, ported versus sealed. As we're looking at the ported designs, you have a lot of ported options. You have square port, you have curved square port, you have round port, you have multiple round port. And the only thing really I would note on this is if you have lower power, the curved port doesn't really matter. Higher power, you definitely want a curved port. Similarly, with a round port, as you can see the examples down here, you have a straight port all the way in the corner. You might get a little bit of chuffing noise from that, whereas if you go with a double flared, which is recommended, you will reduce that considerably. It's similar in how it behaves to having a curved port. It gives that gentle entrance for that air escaping.
If you are going to build your own box, there is software that can help you design it. The most common is the Torres box building. You'll see that on a lot of the blogs. It's kind of old. Subbox Pro is an updated sort of version. You can do 3D models from that. It'll give you cut sheets. I actually like Subbox Pro a lot better. This is an easy way to figure out your port design box.
As we're going to look at some of the sealed box designs, one of the big differences is with a ported, they're typically going to be a square or very calculatable geometric shape. With a sealed, it could be anything, like this sucker up here. I mean, as long as you get the internal box volume correct, it's going to sound just fine. When you go to a ported, you get into weird shapes, your calculations can get very complicated. So a lot of times you'll see they're just a nice square, it's easier calculations, you can get your port right. But in a sealed, you can go nuts. That's one of the benefits. You can fit them into places you couldn't fit something else.
If you're going to build a sealed box, really the Subbox Pro does so much of a better job. That's what I would recommend. I wouldn't even bother with the Torres version. There are other programs you could use, but these are the main ones.
So some of the design differences, if you do decide to go with a sealed box, you can use a smaller size, so the footprint actually gets smaller. Another difference is that with a sealed box, your roll-off or your frequency range is wider. So you have with a sealed box a 12 dB per octave roll-off, whereas with a ported box, it's going to be 24 dB per octave. And what that means is with a sealed box, you're going to have a wider frequency range that you're able to translate well. With a ported box, it's going to be very focused. And just to give you a little nerd description for you nerds out there, this explains that difference. And you're going to see this dB per octave note on a lot of crossovers and that type of thing. And typically on an electronic crossover, it's going to be 12 dB per octave. But it's something, if you can get a 24 dB per octave, that's going to be a higher end crossover typically. As a result, you can narrow down your cutoff. So if you have a high pass filter where you want to cut it off at 100 hertz, if it's a 24 dB per octave roll off, you're going to have it be a very distinguished wall where your frequency cuts off. Whereas if you have a 12 dB, it's going to continue out a little bit further. It'll fade, but it'll still continue on. You'll still hear that higher frequency above that 100. It's a big factor when you're looking at the box. I typically like to have a sealed box because I like a little bit more of that tonal range. But if you had a ported box, that works really well if you want to just go for it. And you can see, this is just looking back at the curve on that. You can see how much more narrow. The purple is ported in the middle. The red would be sealed. So that's the difference of your frequency range and your response of the box. A few more differences. When you're looking at the comparison, if you have a ported box with the same exact power, you will have a louder peak. So where that peak is, it's more focused. So you actually get a little bit more SPL out of it. So if you're looking for a competition or an SPL style setup, you're going to go ported. There's no reason to go sealed. It's also going to be a little boomier. So if you go with a ported box, it's going to have that boomier sort of sound whereas a sealed box is going to be a little bit more accurate. You lose some of your total peak SPL, but you get a little bit more accuracy, which is nice if you're going for SQL versus SPL. The other thing is, if you go with a ported box, it's just going to be more efficient, considerably louder. A sealed box isn't going to be quite as loud at the same power level. So you're trading off a few things: size of the box, SPL, that kind of thing. So you really need to look at, what do I want for what I'm going to do with my system? What is it I want to do? The other consideration, if you go with a ported box, your subwoofers are going to be able to cool better. So your voice coil is going to have a clean exchange of air as that back wave is being released, and you're getting an exchange of air in and out of the box. With a sealed box, the air that's in there is in there, and it can get pretty hot, especially if you live in a warmer climate. The box itself is going to be hot because of the ambient, and then you've got that voice coil in there, and if you're really putting it to it, creating some heat, the heat can't escape. So it will shorten the lifespan of your subwoofer typically, just because of heat. Heat is one of the most damaging factors. So if you go with ported box, that heat gets out. That's a huge benefit if you're looking at a warm climate. Cold climate, you're probably not going to notice. Having said that, I had a sealed box with Alpine Type R10s. It's a little fiberglass deal I made. I ran them for like 20 years before they started to make noises that were unacceptable. But up until that point, they did okay. In the trunk of a car, I mean, I treated them terrible, but they held up. So it's not catastrophic, but just note, if you're going to really push it, ported's probably better. So just to recap everything, higher SPL with ported for the same power. Your range is more narrow. You're going to have better cooling for your voice coil, and it's boomier, but it's going to be looser response. And then you're going to need that larger box. With a sealed box, you'll have a lower SPL, but it'll sound more accurate. If you're listening to, let's say, not Techmaster or Magic Mike or something that's crazy bass, maybe country, you might like a sealed box a lot better. But if you're really going for it, ported's the way to go. It will trap more heat in that sealed box. You will notice if you have space problems and you're limited in your footprint, sealed box is going to be the better design for you. So I don't know what box you need. You're the only one that can determine that. And it's important to figure this out because it's your bass. And more bass is better bass. Remember to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the future installments, including speaker selection, amplifier selection, and installation materials. It's important. You should be able to do this yourself so you have control over it. You can be the master of your own destiny. Once again, I am the Quad Professor, and I am out of here.